and begin to introduce today's speaker. Nathan Johanning is a commercial agriculture educator for University of Illinois Extension. I almost called him a local foods and small farms educator because he was previously a part of our local foods and small farms team. He is housed in Waterloo, Illinois, and he serves Madison, Monroe, Clare, St. Clair counties. He did start Extension in 2013. As mentioned, he was a part of our local foods team, and he was working previously at SIU in research and teaching in plant and soil sciences. He accepted his current position as commercial agriculture educator in the fall of 2019. Nathan has a very broad background in both row crop and specialty crop production, and he specializes in weed, soil, and nutrient management for these. He also focuses on cover crops and no-till production, along with being very active on his family farm south of Waterloo, where he raises a variety of specialty crops, including pumpkins. I knew that when it came to offering a topic like this, that there was only one person on the team that we were going to rope into to cover this, especially as Nathan has continually done a lot of great research on pumpkin varieties. So thanks for joining us today, Nathan. I'll let you kind of take it away.
Thank you, Grant, for that very generous introduction. And hopefully, are you seeing my screen and everything?
We are, yes.
All right, well, we should be ready to go then. So, all right, well, thank you very much. Again, I think Grant has pretty well done a good job of giving you a background of myself. And so in the sake of time, and lots of information to cover, we are going to jump right in. So I'm going to start off by talking about our 2020 pumpkin variety trial, and then I've tagged kind of a subset and some highlights of some weed management concepts for pumpkins onto the end of this. And certainly feel free to enter those questions into the chat. To keep us moving, I will probably go ahead and go through the presentation, like I said, and we'll address all those at the end. But please, as you think of them, do enter those questions in so that way we can give you the best information we can. So off to our variety trial, which you see here pictured. So first off, our pumpkin trends, as we all know, the market for pumpkins and other fall items has been increasing. There's lots of diversity of shape, size, and color, which is very popular. It's not just the standard orange jack-o'-lantern. So there's a lot of things out there, and I don't know what it was like in your area, but down here, we were all scared. I was scared as a pumpkin grower to think, all right, how many how many pumpkins do I need to plant this year? Are pumpkins going to be a luxury that people, don't want to go for, or are they not even going to be able to, are we even going to be open to sell pumpkins at various places? And my response is I almost wished I'd planted a few more. And like the other food crops, pumpkins went over very well. And I hope all of you had similar experiences and consumers coming to you as a local source for pumpkins. So about our variety trial, it's just a few miles south of where most of you guys are probably at, is at the Belleville Research Center, which is just in the St. Louis Metro East. You can see a star there on the map, roughly where we're at. We're about, at the Belleville Research Center is roughly probably 30 to 40 minutes just directly east of the city of St. Louis on the Illinois side. So these were all no-till transplanted into wheat stubble after wheat harvest as a double crop. So they were transplanted June 29th, and we used conventional production management practices, the herbicide program, and then fungicide and insecticide sprays as needed to manage the crop. So overall, what we have was 54 varieties of specialty and jack-o'-lantern pumpkins. So these were all laid out in 2-row plots that were 40 feet long, and we adjusted the plant spacing as best we could for the different shapes and varieties. That is certainly very important for pumpkins, is your plant spacing. So our specialty pumpkins and medium jack-o'-lantern pumpkins, we had, which I'll define more, we had those at a 4-foot by 6-foot spacing. So we had 4 foot within row and then 6 feet between rows, so 24 square feet per plant. And then our large specialties, we had a few that were on the larger side, kind of jumbo size, and then jack-o'-lanterns, the large jack-o'-lanterns that we had, we had at a 4 by 8 foot spacing. So basically 8 feet between rows instead of 6 feet, giving us 32 square feet per plant. Just a quick side note, I do like the thought of looking at that square foot per plant for pumpkins and trying to help you gauge where you're at. There's lots of great seed catalog resources. And a lot of seed catalogs are going to using that because everyone has a different equipment setup, whether it be 5 foot rows or 6 or 9. I've heard of endless, almost different row widths. So how do you really meld that into something meaningful? But by using the square feet, that can really help you a lot. I will give one shameless plug to one of your sponsors, Rupp Seeds, and who also that supported some of this trial and some entries. They have a pumpkin guide, and they're one of many companies that have good category spacings for their pumpkins. So refer to those because those are really important. Obviously, in a variety trial, we can't give every single one of those 54 varieties their own row spacing just for logistics. But we do try to group them and make sure that that is not a confounding factor in what we're seeing. So data collected, this was an observational trial. So we did each plot or each variety was only there once. We did this because for the sake of some of our field day and other events that we've done, we would much rather have 54 varieties with one replication to have more varieties encompassed in it versus having say a third or quarter of those number of varieties that were replicated, because this is largely more for demonstration purposes, but we do collect some, I think, good yield data to help support some of that. So we harvested September 30th, did one main harvest, collecting everything that was ripe. We based our harvest off of a 5-plant area. So you can see we use a PVC quadrad. Usually it's roughly 6 by 20 feet. Although we adjust it accordingly. We have an 8 foot and et cetera and we throw it out in the plots to capture basically the yield from 5 plants. So that's how we quantify it. We also take notes on fruit characteristics, size, shape, and color. So we're going to jump right into this right now. So first we have our specialty pumpkins. So these are whites, warties, blues, reds, tans, anything that isn't traditionally orange in nature, but is a larger size fruit. So I want to make one added comment. This year, we also did have gourds and other smaller pie-sized pumpkins in a trial, but at the research center, we had an excessive amount of rain, somewhere around 19 inches of rain in around a month and a half, right after that started basically the day after we transplanted. And the field that was, maybe a couple hundred feet away that had those pies and gourds laid a little low and held a little bit of water, and which is usually okay, but on an excessive year like this, those actually drowned out to the point that we couldn't collect any meaningful yield data. So I wanted to acknowledge there was another 30 plus or so varieties that unfortunately we don't have the yield information to share on, but certainly the 54 here gives us a good snip of pumpkins to enjoy. So I'm going to jump right in and lay out these slides to start with. So what you're going to see, and this is across all these slides, looking at these 54 varieties, I'm going to list 4 on a slide. So you'll see 4 pictures with the name being at the bottom of that variety. You'll see the variety name first, and then you will see a weight, and that is the average fruit weight for for that specific variety. And then also there will be a yield. So this is fruit per plant. So we've taken our yield calculations and basically converted that to fruit per plant. In one of the handouts that I provided, there's actually a variety trial report, which gives some additional data, including the yield on a per acre basis on fruit number and fruit weight, which gives a little different perspective on some of it. But for the sake of space, I've just condensed it to this, but it gives you a good perspective. Certainly with all these things, yield is not always the most important, especially on these specialty pumpkins. It's more, I think, for your information. Sometimes you might see 2 very similar looking specialties, and you may be able to find one that has a little better yield than the other. However, a lot of these specialties we grow because they really are unique. And some of those varieties don't yield as well as some of our jack-o'-lantern pumpkins, but we know that the market will support it. And even if it does yield maybe even half of what a jack-o'-lantern variety does, if the quality of the fruit and the characteristics are right, we're still going to want to grow that. So to start off here, I'll start with autumn buckskin. That's a really nice tan variety, very similar to our processing type pumpkins. And with that, the autumn buckskin, fairy tale, and jewel box are all in that same family. They're Cucurbita mouschata. So it's versus our Cucurbita pepo, which would be our traditional jack-o'-lantern type species of cucurbits. So in this, you can see they're nice. They vary in size. Some of them are a little more flattened in nature versus some that are more round, almost kind of jack-o'-lantern shaped. But that tan color is fairly consistent. They hold their color, keep well, and certainly are great ones to have if you have people that want some for baking. Fairy tale is the next variety we have listed here. We did not get a super early fruit set on this variety, and many times if you've grown fairy tale, you know that it is very long season. It's usually around roughly 120 days. Some days I think it's even, or some years I think it's even longer than that, because it just seems like it will never ripen. But we do sometimes market these partially green, especially the ones you see kind of on the bottom of those stack. I think some of those, especially the two in the back, would be, you know, fair game and ripe enough to harvest. The one on the top might be a little borderline where it's still kind of shiny as far as actually wanting to maybe market that, although I think it would still keep and do all right. But certainly they will get a nice tan color, similar, very equal to autumn buckskin. The main difference is they have that really deep lobed look to them. They're more flattened. Usually most aren't more upright in nature. They're very flattened, very unique, and very great for stacking, and has unique shapes and colors. This year we had average around 11 pounds, around 1 fruit per plant. And with all these, I feel like if you can get 1 fruit per plant on the specialties, I think you're really doing very well. So that is one upside where I think it would, anytime you see that, that's really good. Although again, yield, especially on the specialties, isn't necessarily everything. Jewel box is another one. So jewel box is, again, that same family of pumpkin. It traditionally will have some bumps and kind of warts on it. I think the one in the back in this image is probably the most representative of some of that characteristic look, although like some of these, it is variable. So there were some that really look like autumn buckskin in this mix. Although autumn buckskin was way down the line, it wasn't anywhere nearby, so I know it wasn't that. So some of these you will see variability, especially when it comes to the warts and things on them. But this one is nice. It has a variety of shapes and sizes. I would say it's fairly comparable in autumn buckskin to the range of sizes it has, but it just adds in some of those warts, which have a slight greenish hint, but usually will turn out to more of just a solid tan color. So it's another nice fruit. The next, we have a new one, which I believe will be out on the market this next year, which was RPX 6229, which is Fool's Gold. That one is a nice actual pepo type. So it's the same family as our jack-o'-lantern pumpkins. It has that almost very similar tan color to it. It's a nice small jack-o'-lantern. Around that 10-pound mark is where we had it. But certainly good yields and has a very consistent and uniform in its production. Next, we have Blue Doll. So we have Blue Doll is a flattened kind of blue Gerardale type. We did not have blue Gerardale in the trial this year. The distinct difference between Blue Doll and blue Gerardale is Blue Doll has more of a I'd say more of a boxy look to it. The shoulders on the fruit are a little taller, as you can see, especially in a couple of those larger ones in the picture. You know, where the stem attachment is actually kind of depressed and kind of lower on the fruit. So it gives it a distinctly different look. I can usually pick, if you put a line up, I could pick a Blue Doll from a blue Gerardale in that shape and characteristic. Inside characteristics are the same as far as how they're the flesh quality and things. One note about Blue Doll I like to share with people, I don't have a picture of in this slide, is that it does have a tendency to split right through the middle of the stem where the stem attaches to the fruit. I've seen this, I don't know how long I've been growing blue doll, but I've seen it for many years. I never have figured it out exactly the reasoning. Sometimes I think it's worse when we have really wet conditions, just like say a tomato that will crack when it gets really wet, or some thin skin fruit crops. But then other years I don't know that that's necessarily the case. Some years it can be annoying because you see a really nice fruit. Oftentimes they will grow maybe somewhat upside down to how you see them here, and you'll lift it over and you'll see that split. Sometimes that split will have healed up and really will not yield any issue for that fruit, but sometimes it'll be open, it can take on water and rot and things. So that's just an aside. It's still a great variety, but something you will see in that variety from time to time. Colorado Sunrise is a new variety that, at least new to for us in our trials. It has kind of a blue doll, pink doll kind of look to it. So between that blue and pink look, it's a little bit flatter in nature, probably more similarly shaped to some of those Jarradales. It did yield very well. It has a variety of color patterns within that blue-pink orientation. So it's definitely something different, nice variety, and actually good yielding for a specialty pumpkin. So I think that is one to maybe look at if you're wanting something new that we haven't seen before. Mellow Yellow is, again, this is a peepo type, bright canary yellow, very good fruit qualities, and very consistent. And so if you want and desire that yellow splash, this is probably one of the primary varieties we see that has that color. One Too Many, this is a unique one. It's been around for a while. It has, whenever it's fully ripe, has this very distinct creamy white background with this orangish red venation in it. They come in a variety of sizes. Here they're more short and round. However, I've seen them, be very long and tall in nature, and just various shapes, maybe more pear shaped slightly, so to speak, or long like a pear would be. So there's a lot of variety there. I will say the yields on them tend to vary as far as actual yield per plant. Some years they seem to do fairly well, and then for yields and other years, it seems like they're a little slower to set and continue on. So, but again, one of those, I think the qualities and uniqueness of it sets it apart from the others. So I'm going to make just a quick reminder. So a lot of these fruits have a lot of edible qualities, so don't forget about this. So I mentioned that, but any of your blue skins, most of those have a golden yellow flesh in them. Like this top would be similar to your blue doll or blue Jarradale, and this lower one would be a fairy tale or an autumn buckskin. Especially this bottom one is a fairy tale. Note, you know how heavy these are. It's because of that thick flesh. So there's a lot of meat that can be processed out of this. That more and more people, I do get, not the majority, but a lot of people are asking about pumpkins to bake with, and this is the direction that I lend them to. So don't forget about those aspects whenever you're trying to market and maybe share the added benefits of those fruits. All right, next on to some of our whites. Moonshine comes in around 6 pounds, yields fairly well. This has been, I think, kind of a standard lately for a white pumpkin. It is a peepo type, unlike some of the luminas and other things, which are a maxima or winter squash type. So it is the same family as our jack-o'-lantern pumpkins. And so it's a nice, most of them are, small carving size pumpkin, make some really neat small white jack-o'-lanterns. We have another one that I think is very similar to this, RPX 6927, which is now called White Gold, which should be out on the market. This is one that I think is very similar in characteristics. The only thing that I would say would be really different is it has a little bit shorter stem on it than what Moonshine does, but a nice, I think, another new nice white variety. The last one in this is Spectre. So Spectre is a little larger than both these. It's almost twice the size on average. Yields are very good. It does have some slight warts on it. You can see that on a few of them. Nothing, most of it's very subtle. Nothing that is compares it to some of the truly warted varieties that some people either love or just completely hate, depending on their opinion. But this does have more of a creamy white color to it. It's not as quite as pure white, but it is probably one of the largest pepo type white or cream white colored pumpkins that are out on the market. Really nice, solid yielder, and so certainly a great another great variety, especially if you want something a little bit larger in the white range. So for some of our flat whites, we have flat white boar. This is a standard for a white stacking pumpkin. This size varies. Here we had around 8 pounds on average, but I've seen them push 15 or even 20 pounds. And of course, you have a few that are smaller. A comparable variety we have is Moon Stacker. So this is a new one for us this year. The yields, I think, were very good. I like the quality of it. As you can see, looking in this picture, for stacking, it has, to me, the visual appeal is a little more consistent. So it's more of a, I'd say, it's a little more of a Gerardale shape, whereas some of the flat white boars can be maybe more discus shaped or slightly tapered on the top edges as it goes down. I think it's a really nice variety, and in the white stacking world. So, and I think it's one that I think I'm going to look into. I know myself that has some real benefits. We have a new one out on the market to compete with some of our awardees, like say a Wardie Goblin, and that is RPX 6889. That's called Fright now. This one comes in around 15 pounds, very good yields, and very consistent in its warts. It is fairly upright in nature. So you can see a few of them are kind of upright. Maybe you'd say slightly maybe pear-shaped or tapered as they go to the top, although in general, but for the most part, there's really a lot of really nice fruits. The wording on it, I will say, is very consistent, which is something I always look for, especially whenever you happen to be working on any wholesale markets. You need some level of consistency to be able to utilize all those fruit in a mix and kind of guarantee a consistent outcome. So that's a nice new one that's out. Peanut pumpkin is another one that has been out for a while. It is in that winter squash family, has that natural callousing and kind of bumps on it that looks like the outside of peanut shells. So a good variety. There is a lot of variability, and you can note some of that. I think those back two fruit, especially the one as you look at it on your screen on the right, to me is like an ideal of the peanutness on it. However, all of them are definitely attract interest and from consumers. So I think another great one to add to a variety selection. So we did have a couple of large specialties. So these are both white varieties. So we had New Moon and Polar Bear. I think both of these are nice. They're Maxima type, so they're in the winter squash family versus being in the pepo family, like some of the moonshine and others I mentioned. So, and this is usually the type of pumpkin that would be that larger size, such as your prize winners and other things. So these are two white varieties. I've grown both myself and seen them this year, and I think they're great to add. A lot of people, I think, have a lot of interest in a few of these larger fruited varieties. They're not every person is going to want one, but every once in a while you find someone that just can't live without having a 30 or 40 pound white pumpkin. So New Moon is a little smaller. On our trials, it averaged around 20 to 25 pounds. That's the average. Some smaller, some larger than that. Polar Bear, average weight was around 30 pounds. Again, I've seen polar bears even pushing 100 pounds, but certainly in that 30 to 70 range. And it does vary, the fruit size does vary a lot, but they are fairly consistently, that Polar Bear is a larger fruited variety than New Moon. Otherwise, characteristics are similar. They will turn a little bit of a creamy color, but they really do hold their color pretty well. All right, so jack-o'-lanterns. So start off, these are our mediums that are under 25 pounds. So going through here to start with, Bayhorse Gold. This is a nice carving size jack-o'-lantern, comes in right around 15 pounds, very good yields, and for us in our environment. And one that I've come to really like, especially the physical characteristics and that the look it has with that stem attachment. Very, to me, very classy look to it. Nice dark color. Bellatrix is another one that's been out. I think, you know, fairly solid yielder, not in the top half of our yields, but certainly has good color and characteristics. Another one is Carbonado Gold. Very good yields on this. This is a little smaller than Bayhorse Gold, but a very nice variety, good consistent size and color. Cargo is closer to that Bayhorse Gold size. Nice shape to it, nice color and ribbing, gives it some good character to it. Not quite as high yielding, but definitely a good variety as well. Eagle City Gold. Eagle City Gold was probably one of our highest yielders we've had, and we've seen that also in 2018 in our trials. Eagle City Gold did very well. Nice consistent shape and color, slightly different in look than the Bayhorse Gold, but I think very comparable. Size for us is very comparable down here on how it grows, and a really nice variety. Early Prince, another one. This very good yielding variety, dark color, does very well around that 10-pound range. So if you're needing a good smaller size jack-o'-lantern to fill needs for that, that's a nice option in there. It does throw off some, for us this year, threw off some smaller fruit. Certainly still usable size. You can maybe mix in with a pie sized or something, but still even with that, there were still lots of really nice sized fruit in there that could 10+ pound fruit that are really nice. Eros. Eros is also another nice variety. Didn't yield quite as high as those last two did. Good shape and characteristics to it. Gladiator. Gladiator is one that has again a nice shape and color. You see a little different, little distinct stem attachment there. Gladiators in our trial this year were around 12 pounds on average. However, I've seen them traditionally, they're a little larger, closer to that 15 to even 20-pound range. But this is what this season, how they grew for us. Hermes is a newer variety that is out. Some characteristics of Hermes: it's a little smaller in size, so around that 11-pound range. Has a fairly large size handle, firmly attached, especially for the size of the fruit. But really nice. I see lots of nice consistent fruit there. Good yields, and very firmly well attached handle. So the handles that won't easily break or anything. So that's I think if you're looking for a smaller variety, another one to consider. Kratos. Kratos is a nice variety, again coming for us around 15 pounds, although I've seen it go beyond that. Has some fruit a little more upright in nature, and again nice color and characteristics. Magic Wand. Magic Wand is, I think, is one of our standards that we have that we've used for many years. Magic Wand is a little smaller than some, so it's in that, again, in that like 11 to 12 pound range on average. The fruit are very round, not really tall in their nature. The handle, again, is a very nice length for it's has visual characteristics to it, but it's not so long that it would say be problematic or easily be broken or anything. Good yielder and certainly solid performer. Orange Sunrise is a newer variety that's out. It is a very good color, shape, has some distinct ribbing on it. Again, a little larger, around that 17-pound range. One unique thing about this that you don't see with these other varieties it is actually a precocious yellow variety. So it is one that turns from kind of a green color to a yellow color, and then that yellow then turns into orange as it matures. So where you would specifically want to use this beyond just being, say, a good variety. Otherwise, if you have lots of virus issues and you get that there's some green flecking on pumpkins from virus issues, a precocious yellow, while it is not necessarily completely resistant to the virus, the orange coloration will mask that far better than some of our other varieties. So if you do see that and have that a lot, this is something to consider. Next, we have Renegade. Renegade is comes in around 13 pounds. Again, solid yielder and very good consistent shape and color. Ray is a little larger, around 16 pounds. The unique thing about Ray is that and it doesn't stand out quite as much in these pictures, but it tends to be flat. The fruit is very flattened in nature compared with some, and it has very long stems on it. So you can often see a very hefty, long stem on it. That's a very unique characteristic for that variety, and I think is one that kind of puts it, separates it from some of the other varieties, is that distinctive stem. RPX 6208 is an experimental variety we've had. It's done, has done fairly well. I believe we had seen it 2 years ago in our trials as well. Qualities look good. The yields weren't ever super impressive, but it certainly has nice potential. Now, RPX 6209 is, I would say, very similar. For us, it was slightly smaller in size, but the yields, I think this year and also 2 years ago, have been very good. Anything that's over, especially one, or I think in this case, our average yield across this trial for this section of the fruit was 1.4 fruit. So anything at or above that is yielding at or above average across this subset, the medium jack-o'-lantern. So 6209 is one that showed some promise. It has very good color and ribbing and consistent, and so that might be one possibly we would see coming up in the future on the market. Secretariat. Secretariat is a newer release in the last few years. Nice, around 12 to 13 pound pumpkin, fairly decent sized stem on it, and just again, nice smaller size jack-o'-lantern pumpkin, very good in yields. SIU 15 is actually a experimental that will hopefully be is from the breeding program of Dr. Alan Walters from SIU Carbondale. That is one that has been in the works and that he requested we include in this trial. It is, I think, has a lot of nice coloration to it, and is certainly a good yielder for Southern Illinois, and so one to kind of keep an eye out for possibly in the future. Skidoo Gold, this is a really nice, very consistent, good yielding, smaller sized, around 11 to 12 pound pumpkin. So this is, I think, a really nice variety, very consistent. I love the consistency, and this may not, for some markets, this may not be important, but certainly when you're dealing in wholesale and you're trying to give someone a consistent product, or if you're just pricing them, say, especially if you're not pricing them by weight and you're trying to give something that you can consistently say falls in the same range, this is definitely falls in one of those that is very consistent and has some good qualities. Spartacus is one I think that's new for us to trial. Fruit qualities were good. The yield for us was not exceptional, but certainly nice fruit qualities to it. Last couple we have Spartan, which has been around for many years. I think it is a standard for us. Our average weight was around 13 pounds. I've seen it go a little higher than that, and I say around average to slightly above average yields, which is what I would kind of traditionally what we'd expect. Zeus is another variety, again, that's I think been out and fairly common. Solid yields, and comes in for us in this case is around 12 pounds. So those are our medium jack-o'-lanterns. And now we're going to go into our large jack-o'-lanterns, our over 25 pounders. So first we have Big Doris. Big Doris has been around for a few years. Very notable to have that very large stem, as you can see, especially on the fruit there in the front of that picture, coming in around 23 pounds. This is one that has really gained a lot of prevalence as far as a larger size jack-o'-lantern. And so that's one I think to keep an eye on. Cronus is another one. The distinct thing about Cronus, which you can see on some of these, especially a couple in the back, is it has a very long stem on it. And that stem often, depending on how it grows, will have very unique characteristic and curl to it. In this case, the Cronus came out were a little bit smaller. I've seen them in fields other years, certainly pushing the 20 to 30 pound range. In some cases, maybe even twice the size of what our average is here. But certainly the characteristics are the same, and fairly good yield. And that stem, I will have to say, does set it off and on for its size, and can really put a unique twist on its how it appears and the statement it makes, especially in a display. Hulk is another larger fruited one. Yields were not as great, but certainly some nice size and shape and characteristics to it. Igor is more upright in nature. Comes in around 17 or 18 pounds, but very good yields. I think our average yield on these larger jack-o'-lanterns was 1.2 fruit per plant. So anything above that in our yields is above average, and I think is kind of one threshold for kind of distinguishing, say, one from another. So that's one that has a lot of, I think, a lot of potential, especially again for that more upright fruit look and the very distinct ribbing and color. Large Marge, very similar to Big Doris, I think, from its shape. It's a little smoother, doesn't have the ribs on it to the same extent, and slightly lighter color, so a little lighter orange in color compared with some of the others, but certainly large in size. Coming in, our average is around 25 pounds, and solid yielder. Next, we have a new one that's PM0003. This is also known as PM 1745. This is one that is not on the market yet, but I do think it will be coming to the market. This is one that I think does very well. It was, I think, one of the highest yielding in this large size. Generally speaking, as fruit size increases, the yields will tend to decrease. You'll get fewer fruit per plant because that plant is putting more emphasis into growing a larger weighted fruit. But this is certainly a good yield for and one of our largest size, coming in almost 26 pounds on average. So it's a little more upright in nature, good color and characteristics, so one to keep an eye out for. RPX 6883 is an experimental variety. It does have a good size and weight. It is unique in this size class is that it does have some green warding to it, not to the same level as, say, a warty goblin or fright, but it does have some warts. They do fade to an orange. You can kind of see in the picture, but they hold their color for a while fairly well, and certainly one of the largest warted orange pumpkins that I have seen. And warts are pretty consistent, not as widespread again, but very consistent. Each one is fairly uniform in that nature. So, and then we have XPU 6002. This is another experimental. Yields are fairly good. Color wasn't quite as good as some of the other varieties, but certainly a decent fruit. And the last one we have is actually newly named. It was an experimental, XPU 7704, which is now known as Tons of Fun. This is another one I think has very solid yields, comparable to that PM variety that we had discussed. Has a nice shape, color, and ribbing to it. I love that deep orange color that any of these varieties will have, and so I think that's a good draw for that one. So just to summarize the variety information, so this is just a taste of some of the many options that you have to fill your niche. If I had my way in unlimited time, space, and resources, I would put a lot more than 54 varieties into a trial, but we try to at least hit some of the new releases and at least a few of the old standards that kind of give you some opportunities to compare them. So consider your markets and the different factors there. I mentioned some things as far as consistency for wholesale. If you're not doing that, maybe that's not as important. So yield isn't everything, but it is important, especially on those jack-o'-lanterns. You could easily double what you're getting off of an acre just by selecting different varieties. And this is just, again, one observation from one season in one geography. So all these factors can change performance, but hopefully it's something to give you some guidance on some reasonably local or within state results from these varieties. So you can find the full report from pictures. You got that in your attachments. It has been submitted to the Midwest Vegetable Variety Trial Report, although I don't think it has been officially published yet. You can look in 2020 for that. Also, if you look in 2018, you can see our 2018 results, which has a very similar report from a trial we did from research that year. I would be remiss to thank all of our sponsors, Rispens, Seedway, Holler, Rups, Harris Moran, Syngenta, Johnny, Cicada, Libby's, Corteva, and the Illinois Specialty Growers Association and Illinois Vegetable Growers Association. All of these groups help to donate money to support the research and data collection and actually handle all these plots. It takes a fair amount of work to put out a trial of this size, and of course to host a field day and events, which we had a small live component along with virtual events. And so that's certainly, we thank all of them, and then all of the seeds were contributed and donated by all the various companies. And if you want to know more on seed sources and handout, if you go to the trial report handout, all the varieties are listed along with the seed sources, so you can find out where to get them or who has them. Also, a thanks to the Belleville Research Center and their collaboration, Dane Hunter and Ron Beckley, and also all of our staff that helped me in most of my crazy endeavors, like putting out 80 pumpkin varieties in a couple of trials. Maddie Hebner was our intern, you see on the transplanter. Sarah, Elizabeth, Bronwyn, Julie, Katie, Jennifer, Lindsay, and then also Alan Walters are all some that helped in some portion throughout the season. And so we really do appreciate all of their contributions to this research. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and spend the remaining few minutes to talk a little bit about weed management in pumpkins. So of course, weed management is important. That's why we're here to discuss it. So I just want to remind you that the plant-to-plant competition can severely reduce yields, as you see in this lower picture of this is actually some non-treated plots from a pumpkin trial a few years ago. Remember also, weeds are not only important from that perspective, they limit air movement, so that can make some diseases more problematic. They can harbor insects and sometimes diseases. And they, more importantly, on some of these, is they reduce and interfere with spray coverage. A lot of our cases we're spraying fungicides, especially in insecticides, to manage powdery mildew and bacterial spot, downy mildew when it's in the area. So if you have a field that looks like that below, how much of that very valuable fungicide are you really getting on the pumpkins, and how much are you getting on the weeds? Not to mention the already compromised competition for resources that those weeds are putting on the field. So just keep that in mind when you're trying to rationalize why you need to be out managing those weeds. So what are common management methods? A lot of our pumpkins are grown with herbicide conventional systems. So we have some options there, which is a lot of what I'm going to talk about. Cover crops and no-till, I think, have a big place. I'm going to hit on that. Lots of tillage and cultivation used for weed management. Crop rotation is important. Anytime you don't rotate, there'll be a specific weed that competes very well with that crop, and that you will find that in that field without rotation, that weed will become more and more prevalent. It'll reseed and become very problematic. So a good crop rotation is very helpful. And then hand weeding and hoeing, I think, is always a part of this to a certain extent, but we hopefully use other tools to reduce that as best we can. And then there's some spot and directed herbicide applications that can be made as well. So just a quick overview of some common herbicides. Gramoxone or Roundup would be two very common burn down herbicides if you're in some kind of limited tillage or no-till system. Some pre-herbicides that listed here in bold: Reflex, Dual Magnum, Strategy, Command, which for most of you, you're not using this on processing pumpkins, so you're going to be using the Command that is in a part of Strategy, and then Sandia. So those are some of our most common herbicides. Note that Sandia can be used pre or post. And one other one I want to mention, I think is very important to mention, is something like Select Max or Post, or there's many generics that are things that can be sprayed post-emergence to control grasses. So that last one is all grass specific. And if you're using herbicides and you're having tremendous issues with grass and your pumpkins, my comment to you is that you shouldn't have that as a problem. So there's actually, it's actually can be very reasonable to include that, and the value you get is very great for the grass control. So, and this is just a really brief overview. So consult the Midwest Vegetable Production Guide for all the full details, which you can certainly get a paper copy or download the PDF for free. So we do have 2 indemnified 24C labels, which means they're basically restricted use labels that you have to access a specific addendum to the label to use that. And that's for dual magnum if you're using it over the top of the row as a pre-emergence. You can use it between row, but you need that as specific label to get the over the top of the row use. And then the other one is reflex. Both of these require a waiver to download in order to use. This can be found through, they're both Syngenta products through farmassist.com or just through Syngenta's website. If you go to crop protection and labels and indemnified labels, you basically create a login, a user login. I've done it myself, so I can guarantee you they don't reuse and sell your information. All you do is it gives you a couple page download of an addendum to the label. As soon as you have that, you can legally use it in those use patterns on your farm. It is indemnified because basically you're waiving any rights by using that to claim any crop injury or anything. I have used both of these for many years. While with any herbicide there can be some issues, I feel like these are very safe and probably just as safe, if not safer, than some of the other products we have labeled, and certainly worth their value. So here's a few pictures from a herbicide trial from a few years ago, just to give you a perspective of what we can gain from some of these herbicides. This is a non-treated plot. So there are pumpkins if you look closely in there, but this is so no pre-herbicide. It was cleaned up at planting. This is no-till, but no pre-emergence to prevent any weed seed germination. So next we go to dual magnum alone, and then this had a select max post application. So you can see we've cleaned up a ton of the water hemp and certainly lots of the grasses in that, just with the dual, but certainly still some room for improvement there as you look down the center of that plot. Note, I did also include, in this case, we did a cost analysis. So the price for that treatment, the select and dual, was around $30 an acre. I certainly can't pull many weeds by hand, get very far on an acre for $30. So I think there's certainly some good value there. So next we had dual magnum plus reflex at 1 pint per acre. And this also had the select max post. So this was one of the things, if water hemp is an issue, that I've really been recommending to growers, because I think it has lots of value, provides very good weed management, is actually a common mix that's used in soybeans as well, where water hemp is an issue. So a lot of value in that dual magnum and reflex together. Reflex is not necessarily a standalone herbicide, but certainly in partnership with dual magnum, it has a lot of value. And reflex is fairly cheap. At that time we did this, I think it was around $7 an acre to add reflex to this mix. So very economical. And I mentioned that grass herbicide. In this case, I think our grass herbicide application was around $10 an acre with the surfactant with it. And I think that if you used potentially you could get even cheaper of some of the generics. So just keep that in mind as you're trying to justify whether you should or shouldn't spray for some of these products. Then we compare that with strategy. Strategy has its place, especially if you have issues with things like lamb's quarter or velvet leaf. However, where water hemp is predominant, it does help, but it is certainly not not as good as some of our other options. And strategy is a lot more expensive. However, I think still could be justified. But what I tell people is make sure you know your weeds. And if water hemp is your issue, then some of these other products might be giving you more bang for your buck than what strategy would. If you had a different weed spectrum, then that equation could change quite a bit. So in summary, so I think reflex is one of our newer tools. It is a good tool that can be used. I would use it with dual magnum and or Sandia or strategy. I would depend that on the weeds you had on hand in your field. Strategy does help more with some of the grasses and some selected broadleaves like lamb's quarters and velvet leaf. So there are some strengths it has. So take a look at your problem weeds and consider what you're spending and just kind of balance that to give you the best options you have. So I'm going to spend the last couple of minutes to talk a little bit about cover crops and no-till. So I could go a whole presentation on this, but I at least wanted to mention it with a weed management perspective. So you're limiting soil disruption and no-till, so you're not bringing up new weed seeds. And then with the cover crops, you're adding extra residue to suppress weed growth. So if you can start off clean, so use a good burn down, and especially by adding some of these residual herbicides, and then you layer on top of it a thick mat, a cover crop like you see here in this picture, which had some cereal rye from a trial we did a few years ago. There's a lot of value there. And then on top of all this, so that's some thoughts into cover crops and no-till, but also make sure in any of these systems, you're preventing your weeds from going to seed. When those weeds go to seed, you're building up the seed bank in your soil. And the more weed seeds are in your soil, the harder your herbicides and your cultivator and tiller and your labor have to work to manage those weeds. Even though it may be more work now, if you can get in the habit of it, in 5 or 10 years from now, you will hopefully thank me for encouraging you to take that route, because you'll see that the weed pressure in these fields is slowing down to the point that maybe the herbicides alone will do it, or the cover crops alone will provide that weed management for you, and you can eliminate maybe just a couple hours worth of weeding or something from those fields. So to illustrate a couple of those things, a little bit of tillage can go a long ways. So the only difference in this picture that you see from the left side of the picture to the right side of the picture is that this was actually from a production field, probably going to soybeans, I believe. But the left side of this picture, it was on the edge of a field, and in the headlands, they had ran a disc through it. This is probably taken around 1st of June or so, early June. And the other part, it had been wet and they hadn't gone back and done anything. There was actually a native stand of like little barley, which is a winter annual grass that competed quite a bit. But look at the difference that tilling, just one disc pass, did for bringing up new weed seeds and weed emergence. I mean, there's water hemp on both sides, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of water hemp on that left side of that. And I would not want to be planting any crop into that. So the other thing, and this is also kind of soybean related, but it's equally meaningful to pumpkins and other crops, would be looking at cereal rye. So you see that black line down the middle of the slide here. To the right side of that, where you see fairly few weeds, there was cereal rye. And then on the other side, there was no cereal rye in that treatment. This was sprayed with a burn down application of Roundup, and which most of these weeds were resistant, so that didn't do a lot. And this is the result. So basically I would say we controlled the majority of our water hemp just with the cover crop. And then certainly in other cases where we'd add other herbicides in a soybean system, then we could enhance this and get nearly perfect weed control. But this just shows just the value of what that cereal rye can bring to the table. So one last thing I would be remiss to note is that we do have a commercial grower newsletter. It's called the Illinois Fruit and Vegetable News. And so we have regional updates from all across the state and other production information. I certainly include lots of pumpkin related information in it. If you have any interest in that, feel free to send myself or my colleague Bronwyn Ailey an email, and we will add you to that email list. We certainly try to keep as much information as we can from all around the state in that, and appreciate Grant and everyone that contributes, all of our educators, to that. So with that, we'll have a little bit of time here. I think we can field a few questions, and hopefully provided you with some good information to capture a lot of those pumpkin related questions you had, and maybe I've even spurred a few more.
Great, thank you, Nathan. Yes, for those that have questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat box. We will try to take some questions today from Nathan. Yeah, and Nathan, I second your the specialty pumpkins. I think the specialty pumpkins is just some really great edible crop that a lot of folks aren't always marketing.
Sure. No, I think there's a lot of opportunities there. So I do see we had a question about plastic or paper mulch for weed control. I think that mulches like that are certainly an option. I, by nature, have tended sometimes for us, especially down here, some of the pumpkins are a little bit, we can't justify using black plastic, and also sometimes we can actually get too much heat on black plastic. However, where you're at, I don't think the excessive heat is as big of a deal, and if you really were worried about that, you could use white or another color plastic or material. Certainly there's some biodegradable products, paper-based and other things you could use. So I think certainly that is another good option that you can use in especially on smaller scale. I do think that it depends on the acreage you're talking on. A few acres is one thing, but I sometimes question if you would really be worth putting in, say 20 acres of black plastic for pumpkins. But certainly if you had an acre or two, I think it would be a viable option, John.
Mm-hmm. We have another question. Any suggestion on rodent control? They share that they bury under large flat pumpkins and have eaten the center of some of their pumpkins.
Yeah, rodent control can be quite an issue, especially that is one, and I didn't go into all of the cover crop issues, but in no-till and cover crops are even more prevalent. So some thoughts on rodent control. First off, trying to manage your weeds, weeds and any other cover. So they do have they do tend to like any kind of cover. So even on cover crops, I try to lay the cover crops down and flat to prevent any extra shelter for them. So the best management I found, I do scout for them. You'll find like some of their favorites. They love I don't have it in the trial, like Cinderella, the red one. Well, you see it on the slide here in that stack. They love red ones. They love Baby Boo, the little white pumpkins. They love those. They can be kind of picky, but they pick their favorites. And so what I do is I scout, and so I will look and I will check fruit. I'll pick them up, kind of check around, look for any nibbles, damage. I've seen them get bad on jack-o'-lanterns. Usually when you do have them, they're very patchy, so you'll get a area where there's a nest of them, and they will kind of be within a radius of that. I would probably, how I would handle is I would usually go out and set out some bait stations. I've even taken a couple of pieces, like a piece of 2x6 and a little prop, just to kind of you want something just off the ground, an inch or two, just that a vole could get under it, but nothing else would. Sometimes even like a big piece of shingle or something would work. Put a small piece of bait under there in those problem areas. And that could be one way to manage it. I've also, if you're going to bait, otherwise baiting on the outside perimeter of your field. If your field area is clean and you feel like they're coming in from the outside, preventing them from, don't bait in the middle of your field if you think they're coming from outside, because then they have to walk through there to get the bait. You want to bait the perimeter of your area. And with that, mostly anytime on that case, I'm talking about using a product and we're putting it under some kind of shelter. I've seen people use PVC pipe to make like a little trap kind of sorts. It's got like a PVC T of sorts that they could stick bait into, that other varmints cannot get into, that your animals, pets, etc. So that would be some of my best recommendations. So Abbey Farms, you have a good question. You actually caught something I forgot to mention. So yes, so the reflex label technically did expire in the end of 2020. However, all the paperwork has been submitted to have that renewed, and I was told that at least by Syngenta that they were planning to renew it. It is just in process right now. So I would say certainly watch if you get the Illinois Fruit and Vegetable newsletter, I will make sure to include something in there with that. We had done that right at the end of the year and submitted all the paperwork for that, but as best I know, there should be nothing would change on the reflex label, and it would be the same. Actually, if everything goes as planned, the reflex label would also include winter squash technically on the label, which would also which would actually give us more coverage to use in some of our specialty pumpkins without kind of stretching it, because some of these specialty ones, we don't really know technically, should we call it a pumpkin or is it a squash or what is it? But that addition to the label will help broaden that coverage and make it so there's not any question about that. So so Abbey Farms, watch for that, and I will make sure that we get that. But that is a very good call. You're very on top of that for looking that up. And I did not, I overlooked mentioning that as I was trying to wrap it up on time. So Grant didn't hang me up for going over. So
we're more than happy for you to go over. So, see, I'm looking through the chat box. We've had someone mention they use cayenne pepper sprinkled around. They don't like that at all for rodent control. Yeah, smaller patches, you might be able to get away with that, or certain sprays. Sometimes if you see sometimes the cayenne pepper sprays, sometimes they're not always listed for fruits and vegetables. So that's the thing I would be a little bit cautious of. If you do the spray, of course, in this situation, you're talking about just cayenne pepper. Question, will you be having a 2021 pumpkin field day this year? I probably are going to do that, yeah.
So we are going to take a year off. Okay. So traditionally our field day has been held in alternate years, which is in this case has been the evens, at least how it's worked out. We had one in 14, 16, 18, and 20 now. Boy, I've been around a while, haven't I? So 2022 is tentatively, although nothing is in stone, that is tentatively when we'll have another pumpkin field day. Probably if as it stands now, I would assume it will be back at Belleville where it was this past season. But that would be our tentative plans at this point. And certainly we will let Grant and everyone know when we do have that. There were a few folks from up in your area that drove down and joined us this year for Pumpkin Field Day, and so that was very nice. So.
And you did videos of that as well. It's on one of the YouTube channels. Is that correct?
Yes, I did not. I didn't mention this specifically, but thank you. Yes, if you go to the Illinois Local Foods YouTube channel, that you can find. There's actually a playlist for Pumpkin 2020 Pumpkin Field Day and Research. And so you can find presentations from Muhammad. So if you haven't got enough of him, or Casey, or anyone, you can find all of their information. Thank you, Sarah, for covering me on that one, throwing that in there. So yeah, you can find all of the information. I did recordings of the variety trial at Harvest. And so there's 3 different videos for the specialties, medium and large jack-o'-lanterns as a walkthrough. So you guys have, and you're the first ones to actually get the final data from that trial report. It's not even been published by Purdue yet. So so this is so you can you're the first ones to get your hands on a copy of that report. So you have the videos, the full gamut of you've had about all the data I can give you, short of walking through it in person. So.
Sure. Any additional questions for Nathan? We've gone over just a little bit, but I just want to make sure.
Yeah, and what Sarah posted in the chat there was the playlist for the research and field day. So I think there's at least 6 different videos. The entire field day is on there, and so there's quite a few different resources. So if you're interested in pumpkins and want to see a little more, you can certainly take a look there. So.
All right, well, I don't see any additional questions. So thank you, Nathan, for joining us today and presenting on this topic. I know it's you got some good comments in the chat box. They're really excited about this topic. And I know a lot of us are really thinking spring at this point. So we want to thank everyone for joining us this year for our Stateline Fruit and Vegetable Growers Conference. Thanks yet again to our sponsors, Rep Seeds, Syngenta, and McHenry County College's Center for Agrarian Learning. You will be getting a couple more emails from Sarah and I with an evaluation, as well as links to the recordings of these sessions. Please feel free to reach out further. But yes, thanks yet again for being a part of this virtual program, and have a great start to your growing season.